All right, so we're going to do sequence diagrams today, and let me make sure that actually start. Yep, it started. I'm going to get up Visio. Although, as I said, I've really grown more fond of Lucidcharts than I used to be. But we'll do Visio. And I am going to, I don't see it here, so I'm going to hit software on that list. And UML sequence charts are what we're doing. So I'm going to create a blank sequence chart. I'll zoom it a little. And I might also get the magnifying class just to go over some of the tools in there. All right. So what sequence charts are about is about how objects talk to each other. Right? So you have over here, you have like an object and then a timeline. The timeline is just dashes going down. It's not a measured timeline. It's not telling you how long something lasts. It's just giving you a general direction for time. This green thing is optional, but it tells you when an object is active, which can be useful. There are some things you can do, like looping. You can express loops by just putting a box around it, basically say it loops over and over. Notice that all these, what they call optional fragments, they're all basically just boxes, like the loop box. So whenever you want to highlight something, you put a box around it. We're going to do like basically messages and return messages. There's a message to the self, like where a class calls a method inside of itself. Does that make sense? And there's also asynchronous messages, which I'm not going to do much, but asynchronous means that you can pass on something and you don't have to wait for an answer, right? So it can continue on and the answer will come whenever it comes. Those are a little trickier to manage in real coding, but they can be. So there's not a lot of shapes here, but the concepts here are a little bit more complicated. I forget what I actually said for you to do in the assignment, but I'm probably going to do one of them. I think we'll start with a login. We'll do a couple of examples. So there's an object, and you could do, I'm going to just do the user. I'm going to do like the database. Well, actually, before the database, I'll do, let's say we have a login object. It could be the class. I often do, let's call it login class. I can fix that up here if I go to the, actually the pointer tool, and then just spread that a little. All right, and then I'm going to do the database. These aren't strictly objects. The login class might be, but is this too big? Okay. So we're going to do, and I'm going to do one after this that's a little more detailed about things, but this is sort of that. So these are your basic objects, and then these are the timeline going down. So I might actually do like a little activation thing here. And you can shrink these theoretically, so you can shrink them or expand them. So one of the things the user is going to do is it's going to pass in, and I'm going to just do a message in to the login class. And I might do an activation thing there to link to also. I'll adjust these later. So this is a message, and I'm going to double click the message, and I'm just going to put in
what they're actually passing, which is their username and password. Okay, so they're passing in their username and password to the login class. So the login class is going to do with them whatever it needs to do and send them to the database, right?
Does it matter when you put the errors?
It doesn't matter a lot. They're still passing username, password. So the thing to remember is that supposedly you're moving down in time, right? So it doesn't really make sense to put an arrow up like this much, right? Because then you're moving backwards in time. But generally, we're just going through, and so we're passing the username and password. The login class does something with that, probably connects to the database, passes in there. The database is going to validate. So I'm just going to do like this and say that it validates. And the way I usually do this is that this will be it'll call a stored procedure, right? And the stored procedure will validate the password if it's hashed. Yeah. So this is called a self. This is where it calls something in itself. So it's calling a stored procedure on the database, right? So both of those things are on the database. The database calls the stored procedure, validates, and then it will send back. We'll do a return message. And again, I'm just doing it. Whoa, I don't want that. I just want to do a return message, which I'm having trouble with my things. Right here is fine, I guess. And I might spread this down a little. Now, if you're really careful about these, and if you're doing this more precisely with the objects, these can be really useful information because sometimes you need to know the state of an object. And it's a question as to whether this would be in memory and active the whole time or not. I'm not going to worry about that right now. That's what you can use it for, to know when is that object present, when is it active. Does that make sense? So that can be useful to know, especially when it's complicated. Ours isn't particularly complicated. So this is going to send back 0. It actually sends back 1 or -1 if it's a stored procedure. -1 if it fails, 1 if it succeeds.
Is that like the Boolean?
It's kind of a Boolean. So I don't know why SQL stored procedure returns 1 or -1. -1 is failure, 1 is success. I think it's because you could return a 0 could be more meaningful. Well, actually, -1 could be meaningful in certain contexts. I'm not sure. I just know that that's what it returns. All right, so one of the things then, if it's a 1, one of the things I usually do, so I'm going to make this more complicated. I'm going to do a query from this back to the database. So this is if it's 1, or if 1. I'm going to get the select, let's just say user ID. And if it's not 1, I'm trying to remember how you do alternative. There it is. You could come down here and you could do alt. I'm not going to do that right now. We're going to assume that it's good. And then I'll show you, if you wanted to do alt, what you would do is you do a box and redo this all with the other version. Does that make sense? So we're going to assume that this is good, that we get their user ID. So that's what will be returned. And then this will send I'm going to do a quick activation line down here. I might shrink that a little bit. It's going to return a welcome message. That makes sense for just a simple login. And again, we could do an alternative down below. And we're telling it pretty much what we're passing, right? We're passing the username, password. You can put a comma in there if you want. And then we're passing that on to the database. The database is returning, what is that?
The arrow. Yeah, it's an arrow pointing. The return arrow.
How did that happen? Ooh, but then the validate. Oh, I know why it is. It was the self one, right?
Yeah.
So let's add that one back. I don't know why it got pushed over though. So we pass the username, password, we validate it, it passes back 0 or 1. If 1, we send a query for the user ID and we pass that back. We should probably also, right here, I might do one other thing there since I'm trying to be really tightly accurate. I'm going to do another self message. And I'm going to say it will write to a session. To a session variable. That's to prove that they're logged in. Okay, so that's my login one. And I tried to be really accurate and detailed about it. They could be simpler than that. Right? They could also be more complicated. Does that make sense, though? Can you, I'm going to zoom just a little bit. Here's a question. Does that help you understand how classes talk to each other at all? If you were doing that. If you're thinking about, so where these diagrams are really useful is if you've got a complex interaction between classes and you really need to decompose it. You need to figure out what messages are passing back and forth between the classes. And as I said, the timeline is not measured. It's just present moving forward, right? But you can figure out which happens first, what messages are passed back and forth, you know, what methods are called. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, that's all right. Do you have questions? What? Yeah, it's a bit of a pain to draw these to some extent. Visual Studio used to auto-generate these, but it doesn't anymore. I actually noticed they took even class diagrams out of coding part of Visual Studio. There's still a UML part of Visual Studio. I might show you at some point where you can go into Visual Studio and you can create UML diagrams, but they don't convert them to code anymore. I don't know why. No questions on that one? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make another diagram here, but this one will be for the, oh, I'm still at 200 too. No wonder that was so big. All right, I'm going to go do a second page. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger too. This one I'm going to do for show tracker, the one where it's kind of, it's closer to maybe what your assignment would be. I mean, you might have a login thing. But I was thinking of adding a new show. So what kind of objects do you think I would have? Who adds the new shows? Maybe I need to make that a little bigger. Guys are so quiet. Probably the venue, right? You guys haven't been working with this one actually much. So we need an object. Probably we're going to create a show object, but I need something to create a show object. I guess a venue could create a show object. Part of an object is artist. I might add it later. I'm trying to think of what is in the show besides this. I might put in, I'm not going to go through all the login stuff, but I will put in a login in here. Because they can't do the show without the login, although you could assume that.
Are these actor lifelines or object lifelines?
These, they're object lifelines. What's the act? You mean that?
Yeah, like what would be the difference between like an actor lifeline and an object lifeline?
I'm not sure there would be a difference. I mean, these are only about how objects talk to each other. So you'd assume, for these to be objects, you would assume that there is a class in the database. I mean, not in the database, a class in the program that's got these names. Does that make sense? So I will do, the venue would log in, right? And we're going to assume that it's valid. So I'll do venue. And you can get, I'm going to abbreviate this a little, user and password. So I'm going to have a thing. I'm not going to do the whole login thing. I'm just going to say it passes back a welcome. And then maybe I will do the self message here where it basically writes user to session so that you know that they can log in. So once they're logged in, I'm going to have them create a new show. And I think I might move that down there. This is something you can do. You don't have to. Oops, not to there. So I'm going to say that they create a new show object. Something you can do, as I said, but you don't have to, is you can show that the object is created. You can drop them down a little bit. They don't all have to be across the top. So you can kind of show in the timeline where they're created. So they're going to create a new show object, and then they're going to enter show information. Which you could get detailed about, but I'm not going to. We probably need an object to write that. I guess the venue can then do that. Enter show information into the show object. I'm going to say also add artist. So I am going to maybe make an artist object. Oops, not that. Oh, I see where you got the actor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So an actor would be like, instead of venue, if I had the user that's, you know, once they've logged in as a venue, then they could create the venue object, I suppose. And then, so what I want is a new object, which will be artist. Not artist. So I will say that they create an artist. I'm going to assume these are new artists. I'm trying to, you guys can help if any of this makes sense, if you want to help what I want to do. I think I want to do a show like a loop where they go through and add as many artists as need be to the show. I'm trying to think of where I'd want to put an artist list if I did that. So I might let's make a new artist list. And then I'm going to create the artist. I'm thinking this through as I'm doing it, which is not necessarily a good idea. So once they've created an artist list, they're going to create a new artist. I'll move it up in a moment. This is getting more cramped than I wanted to. So I'm just going to say for artist. And then they're going to add the artist to the artist list. And I want to put, what I wanted to do is put a loop around that. So let me see if I can do this. So that's basically, they're going to do that for as many artists as there are. And show is probably active this whole time, even though it's just waiting there. And then I'm going to add artists to show. And we're getting off screen. I don't know if I can get this all on screen once I'm done with it. And then I'm going to write the show to the database. And again, the activation things are not crucial. I'm going to move that down so it's not moving upwards in time, and move this up. Let's just do the add, that's right. All right, so I'm going to move it down a little bit. Just, I know you can't see it, the comments like that, but does that make sense? Yeah.
You added artists from venue, but not from artist list, I guess. Like, I don't know. Does that make sense? Like,
So what I'm thinking of is a list of, within the show, there's probably a list of artists. So it's possible that this artist list should be over here and the artist should be over here because they're probably added to the, one of the methods in show is probably to add artists. What I was doing here is I'm looping through the artists and I'm adding a list, and then the list is added to the show, and then the show is written to the database. How it actually happens would, you might change your diagram depending on that. So the artist list is just an array of artists. It is an object, but you don't always put it into the diagram. Does that make sense?
yeah.
I'm trying to think of what other, if I can get it so it mostly is in there. I wanted to show that you can loop here, and these things can take a lot of thought, which I did not necessarily do when I was creating this now.
I have a question.
Yeah.
At the write show to database,
Yeah.
why doesn't it come from show object? But from
Well, so you usually don't write the show from within show.
oh, okay.
Right, so you'd write it in something else. There may be a missing object here that's doing a lot of the writing. There might be a data object that actually takes the show object and then writes it to the database. I have the venue doing that, but there might be another object over here that actually does that work. But generally, like, I don't usually write an artist from within artist, and I don't write a, you know, so you create an artist and the venue adds the artist. And I'm assuming that they just do that. But as I said, it might be better if those were attached to show. Artist and artist list might be in show.
Mm.
So another way to do that, maybe I should move these over here and show them in show. I might do that in a moment. We'll see. As I said, it takes a lot of thought. But the thing is that it forces you to think through how your objects talk to each other. And none of these are meant to be, you know, all of the diagrams, all the UML diagrams, none of them are meant to be one and out. You basically, you do them, you rethink them, you talk about them, you fix them. You know, you can keep going through them until you've refined them, until you have a really good picture of what you're going to do. And this can help you when you're coding if you know how things talk to each other, especially if it's complicated, right? getting a picture of how the messages go back and forth, which classes are talking to which classes, can actually be a really, really useful thing. Now, you wouldn't want to spend months at it, but you could spend a couple hours at it trying to figure out how the things talk. And then again, this is a one-off, and then you might want to go through and talk about, is this actually how it works? Maybe it should be moved over to the show object.
The database be involved more than that,
Well, so nothing is going to be,
or just at the very end.
just at the very end, we're just going to write it. If there were read and writes along the way.
Right.
Now, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm assuming these are all new artists.
Right.
So if in real life, there's probably another complication because you would look to see if the artist is already there. And then if the artists were not there, you do new artists.
And if you were there, you take all the information.
You take the information from the database, yeah. One of the reasons I didn't draw it that way, because I had thought about that a little bit, is that one of the things that's hard to do is alternatives. If you do basically an alternative is you just do another box in here. I'm not going to leave it there. Where you show what would happen as an alternative to the thing that's up above it. Right, so you just do it twice with this one has whereas this has the loop up here, this one says alt. So basically you would do this. I could right here do the same. Basically it's telling you that this box is not moving down in time really, it's just repeating what's doing up here but for an alternate version. In my mind, that is kind of complicated. I think that it actually makes more sense to do a different diagram for the different alternatives, simply because they're easier to read that way. If you start having a lot of boxes with a lot of alternative routes, it gets really complicated and hard to read.
How do you, when you put a box in there, how do you let people know that a decision was made to go the alternative route?
So you can label these, right? There's a loop. This one has if there's any parameters within the loop. The other one, the alternate, has alt up there, and it also has conditions. So you can explain what the conditions are for this alternative route. Yeah, so this one, the alternative, one of the things right up here is that it is assumed that this is a valid login. Right, you could have a box under there that says condition invalid login and see the alternate. As I said, these can be really complex, and they can take some thought. And I think the classes that we've done so far, we did relations between them. But this is more like what methods are being called in each one, how are they working, how they talk to each other. And the diagrams that we did don't really tell how they talk to each other. What methods they call from each other and etc. And if you want to understand how the program's going to work, these are really close to how the program's going to work. These give you the logic of how these objects interact. The others, relationships as opposed to interactions. Again, I'm not sure this is the best of all diagrams. Do you want to do another one, or do you guys think you want to try them? Okay. I will post this. I might modify this a little bit. And I'll post the login one too. So in the Canvas, again, it's basically just there's a group one and there's an individual one. So this is the sequence, and for the individual one, it's just how does administrator log on to change a cert requirement. And then an administrator enters a substitution. And if you don't have the classes in your diagrams, you can add new classes without having to draw the diagram for them. You know, if you need a class for doing these. For the group one, and I know a lot of people are missing today. Let's see. Class coding, class communicate. Do I not have the group one there?
You do. I thought.
Oh, I see. I have it under group. I separated them into two things here. Probably the module would be a better route here.
They're together in the student.
Yeah. So this is the when a new person registers and donates. So a donation, and then the other one is basically registers and applies for a grant. So they're very similar, but they're. So give it a shot. We'll take a look at them. So you can do the group one if your group is here. If your group isn't here, you could work on the individual one. And then, yeah.
The individuals says it's due tonight.
Say again.
The individual is due tonight.
Don't worry about the due dates.
That's on Thursday. What?
Yeah, so don't worry. Just in general, don't worry about the dates. I make those dates up like in the late last quarter, so they don't necessarily reflect how we're moving this quarter. I don't take off for late. I sometimes rethink, I'm tempted to rethink that when people turn in all their assignments on the last day of finals, but you guys have been pretty good so far, so. Yeah, don't worry about the due dates. Same with the midterm. So the midterm, I think, says it was due a few days ago. Don't worry about when it's open until the end of the quarter. Just make sure you do it before the end of the quarter. And I will probably add a final, as I said, before the end of the quarter, so too. They're called finals, but they don't have the same pressure that a final would have, because it'll be 3 times through and open book. All right, questions? You guys ready? I will, as I said, I might modify that a little bit. If you look in my blog too, there are lots of examples of sequence diagrams and things from the past, which you could look. So if I do Conger ITC blogspot, which you can also get to from the syllabus. And if you type in sequence diagrams, which I've done before, it looks like, last time probably, you'll see that there's a login sequence there for the thing. There's a game sequence with like the player and the hand and the deck and the card. And there's some other various ones if you want to look at them. Don't have to, but they're there if you want. All right, I will post these. As I said, I might make a minor variation to the second one. See if I want to put these over here. I'm thinking of changing this a little bit, so.
Are you talking about group assignment or individual assignment?
What?
What were you doing?
You can do whichever.
Okay.
If your group is here and you want to work on it, you can. If your group is missing, then I would suggest the individual one.
You want to do it? Yeah, we do it when you guys die. That's fair, right? Guys, come on.
Thank you, but at least there's three restrooms.
Rare stuff. It doesn't matter. You don't have to like take it like certainly.
Oh, so what's this? Yeah. What's the object?
Yeah.
Okay. That kind of thing.
Is it a Google Doc?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, show how to apply. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, there are no. Yeah, we're gonna have
Do you guys do it? Yeah. I just do it. Oh, wow, do I do it? I have to, oh, that one.
yeah, for sure.
Unless you start with this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, be at one line.
Okay, so the person would first click register. They would put their name and their email, and then it would go to the login file. And that would pass it through the database. And the database would validate it. If the person already exists in the database, we could do an alternate. Like if it already exists, but it would say already registered. But if it says, if negative one is selected. So if negative one is selected, which means that they're not in the system, then we would register the new person. Okay, well, I just asked what
She walks in class. Take up so much of the look at you, right? Will that happen?
try tag person's login in with that. So the person would start with registering.
Yes.
And put their name and their email.
I was just modifying it to reflect what we were talking about.
And then the database would validate it. So it would either -1 or 1. If -1 is selected, and then once they're registered, you would donate, and you would just put an amount. And then after the donate class would pass that to I'm assuming it's cash. Like,
Maybe online, that means I will say.
It's just like.
yeah, because if we get credit card, then we don't have it. Would register be its own class?
I mean,
We could do a loop here.
Yeah.
so I showed up a bit late. What is the activation of the green line? Wait, that's supposed to represent.
The green line represents when it's active, when the object is active, when it's basically in use and in memory.
Yeah.
We could do an alternate.
And I'm not too strict about that because that's actually a really subtle thing. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm gonna post these in just a sec.
By the way, I created a Google Doc.
I just wanted to make, yeah, so it's when the object is active.
Oh, the white. You can jot. Well, size and you do the, you know about things. So if you right click and then you do it on the get this thing. This thing. It look like a base. Size, shape.
Yeah.
Try making it. Like this one. You click it like a change color. Yeah. And if you press each one.
Yeah, in a second, let me just,
Yeah, so that one.
Oh, yeah.
So that's for that. But, yeah.
How's it communicate when a new person registers? So we can do it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm working on my.
Yeah.
Thursday?
yeah,
Which area you want,
Here, so I'm saying if they.
this coming
this
Thursday?
one here, here?
I don't know, we'll see how far people get. It might
Besides, make it
be
bigger and then.
on the map again. Trying to work on the midterm.
Okay, I'm still the only one.
You're still the only one in your group?
It's, click on it and,
So if there's nobody here by Thursday, then let's talk about that, because you shouldn't be the only,
I think they will.
okay. So I would do the individual one today if you haven't already.
Yeah. I can't wait.
Okay.
So is there any other?
No, that's okay.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, that's fine.
And there's like a.
see,
Yeah,
you
just
know,
a second. Yeah, just a- that looks like you-
well, look at the altitude, ranking, some trick and everything.
One of the objects might be like. That actually
It starts out the registration, create a registration.
Yeah.
And then they basically break off and relog. Right. Yeah.
Right.
And then when log in, it'll be about who they are.
I think after register phase class,
I'll look at it. So what were you?
How do you do an alternate? I don't know how to work it.
So if you wanted to do an alternate, you'd probably just put that box underneath and just sort of do another. So you've got the alternate right there.
Yeah, so I wanted to show like if I could be like I put it there because it's there.
So you could do like the condition already registered or something. And then you would show like a different path, different result. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then do you use the same line here?
Yeah, I would use the same lines and stuff. Basically, it's the same object. It's just,
Yeah.
but
I don't know what
I think it's because your condition box is so big that you make it shrink a little. Not that.
Right.
This one?
Yeah, see the condition where you have the name, of the condition, not the whole alt box, but just the, is it shrinking everything? Look at that. So go ahead and,
We'll redo it.
The box, it's for the condition box.
Okay, so here's the box.
right,
There's two conditions.
right. So you might want to delete one of them. And then on the other one,
If data exists,
yeah, and then let's see if we can,
when you resize that, the condition box, resize the outer box.
so when you do that, it goes pretty quick. Can you do it?
change that.
Oh, let's do that. And we'll do it. That's good.
You put them in here.
Well, that's what I was going to think, but see, it keeps popping to the middle.
So you have to resize the.
What, that's one reason I suggested, if you really want to show an alternate, you do a separate diagram. One with, this is, basically, you just do two diagrams, one that shows what happens when it works, one that shows what happens when it doesn't work. I think that's clearer than those decision boxes, which are real squirrely, you know? If you got a person, log in,
So if they don't, it's just
yeah. Yeah, okay, so then they do the, goes to the database and then the confirmation. It's not a complex.
Yeah, I think it's very,
Would you use register?
as a class?
You could make register as a class,
I think that.
so,
Yeah, how would you
Yeah.
pass that through?
so what you would do is if you had a registration object, so you have a registration object, so you have a user would register, they just pass their user information to the database, then they would go to the login.
So it's like two separate things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because generally, user doesn't have to log in to look at stuff, but to do stuff like log in, like to register, and then like log in, and then redirect it to the login, to donate or. So if you wanted to add that, you could.
So. I think that looks fun.
Yeah. It's a person and they will pay. But we're supposed